be friends.
Have you not?
Good evening, everybody, and very Merry early Christmas to all of you. Hope you all are having a great night tonight. And welcome to the lo-fi edition of the Ambassadorial Wing. Of course, I am your host, the Ambassador, broadcasting from the Ambassadorial iPad. And sorry for the delay, everybody. I am very sorry. The laptop's acting up again. It's doing an update. It's doing some darn thing or other, and it's just being a pest. So it's like, you know what? The heck with it. I'm just going to do it this way. So, anyway, hope you all are having a good night. Hope you having it's start of a new week. We're 2 days in, and we're getting ever closer to this weekend, which of course, the Sunday is Christmas Eve, and of course, next Monday is Christmas Day. So, and back with y'all with another Ultra Retro Rewind stream this evening. And tonight, this is actually a double feature Ultra Retro Rewind. It's actually a Ultra Retro Christmas Rewind double feature. Try saying that 10 times fast, but you can't. And tonight, of course, we are on episode 2 and we of the Christmas Rewind streams. And tonight we are discussing a pair of films. Well, one film, two versions. The original 1947, A Miracle on 34th Street, and the 1990s remake of A Miracle on 34th Street. And as always, if this is your first visit to the Ambassador Wing, welcome one and all. Hope you all enjoy the stream. Whether you catch us live on YouTube or Twitter or X, whichever way you want to call it, or you catch us on the replay. Hope you enjoy the stream. Hope you enjoy the discussion. Again, sorry for the lo-fi version, but if I can't do it on my laptop, I'm going to do it on my iPad, and I'm just glad I have the iPad to do it on. So, anyway, a little bit of background on Miracle on 34th Street. This is one of a few Christmas movies I have never actually watched. I know, that's weird. As much as I love Christmas, and I love the character and the idea of Santa Claus, I have never watched A Miracle on 34th Street. Not once. Well, until the last couple of weeks. And I actually was lucky enough, I found a copy of the remake with Sir Richard Attenborough as Kris Kringle, aka Santa Claus, and Mara Wilson as Susan or Susie Walker, and Dermot Mulroney as Mr. Gailey. And okay, I'm going to be doing this a little different because, like I said, I don't have access to my laptop's updating or whatever. So I'm going to be using my iPad and thankfully my iPhone. So I'm going to be doing a little looking backwards and forwards because I'm going to need to look up some things because I didn't get. I wish I'd had to. I should have made the time. Let's just be honest here. I should have made the time and I should have looked up the full cast list. You know what? Let's use Siri. Siri, look up the cast list for the 1990 version of Miracle on 34th Street. Let her do her thing. Here we go. Thank you, Siri. So, okay. No, I don't want that. I just want the cast list. So just give me the stinking cast list. Okay. Richard Attenborough obviously as Kris Kringle. Elizabeth Perkins as Jory Walker or Doris Walker. Dermot Mulroney as Brian Bedford. I didn't know they changed his name. Huh. Okay, my bad. They changed his name. And of course, well, those are the main ones. Those are the important ones. Of course, all right. Robert Prosky as Judge Harper. And let's see. Oh, they even got the original cast on here. Go figure. Anyway, a little bit of background. Of course, the original had Maureen O'Hara as Doris or Dory Walker. They had Natalie Wood as the daughter, Susan Walker. It had a different gentleman by the name of Edmund Gwynn as Chris Kringle, aka Santa Claus. And I can't remember the name of the guy who played Mr. Gailey in the remake. But tonight we're going to take a little bit of a different. We're gonna compare and contrast these two movies. Which one had the better Chris Kringle or Santa Claus? Which one potentially had the better mother-daughter duo? Which one had the better antagonists or the antagonistic element? And we're going to ask the other question: which was better, to actually use a real life department store like the original 1947 version did, with using Macy's department store, which still exists today, or using a fictionalized department store in the name of, for the remake, with the department store known as Kohl's. Now, granted, there is an actual store called department store called Kohl's. We all know this, but it's not spelled the same way. This one's spelled Coles. Now, you might be asking, Ambassador, you've never seen these movies up until recently. Why have you never seen them? It's a simple case of I didn't think they would really be my cup of tea. I didn't think I would necessarily enjoy them. But surprisingly, I did. I really did. I did enjoy these movies, very much so. And um I have to admit, I did watch the remake first because I was going to try and find, if I'm able to, I like to try and find a physical copy of a movie. I was able to find a physical copy on Blu-ray of the original or the remake of Miracle on 34th Street. I was unable to find a copy, so I eventually, it turned out that Amazon, we have an Amazon Prime account, and they actually had on there for free. So I picked a couple of days when I either got off work early or I was off from work, period. And I sat down and I watched them both. Well, not both same time, but not back to back. But I watched one and I watched the other. And I was aware of these movies. I'm aware they existed. I just had never. They just weren't necessarily my thing. I didn't think I would necessarily enjoy them because there are so many other Christmas movies or movies that I would consider a Christmas movie out there that I do enjoy, that I have watched and I watch every year. I mean, we reviewed them here on the channel. I mean, I watched Charlie Brown Christmas, I watched Home Alone, I watched Scrooged, I watched National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, and so on. All the ones that we all watch around Christmas time. But these were a pair of movies I just, an original and a remake, that I wasn't really super invested in seeing. But Madam Ambassador, being the wonderful and wise woman that she is, she was like, maybe you should check these out. I was like, you've been right before. So I gave them a shot. Now, in terms of the remake, because that was the one I watched first, I will say this. Richard Attenborough, let me put it this way, Sir Richard Attenborough as Chris Kringle was, I think, in a lot of ways, there were some strengths to his performance that I preferred. There were some things that he did with his performance that I particularly liked, and so on. But there were some different aspects of the performance with the other gentleman, Edmund Gwynn, that I enjoyed his performance as well. Now, in terms of Sir Richard Attenborough's performance as Chris Kringle, he was a little more, I don't want to say personable, because both performances, both versions of Chris Kringle of Santa Claus were both very personable. But what they did with Sir Richard Attenborough's version, they kind of kept him framed with the children and the parents and so on, and particularly with Brian Bedford, Dermot Mulroney's character, and of course, um, Doris and Susan Walker, played by Mara Wilson and Elizabeth Perkins, and everything in the remake. Whereas in the original version, Chris is out mingling with the people in the city. He's talking with the workers there in the department store itself. One young man in particular who likes to play Santa Claus, and he builds more of a rapport with the people in the business itself. He actually has interaction with, well, it's a fictionalized version, obviously, but a fiction, but with Mr. Macy, the owner of the company. And I will say this: granted, two different characters, obviously two different visions for the company. One's a real life department store business. The other one is a fictionalized one. There was something about Mr. Macy that I liked a little bit better about everything in terms of his personality and his portrayal and so on in comparison to Mr. Cole. Now, they did introduce a interesting tweak with this version. So, um, with the remake, the company of Kohl's department stores, they've been in a bit of financial trouble, and they're really hoping that they can turn around the business with a good Christmas season. And when they happen to hire on Chris Kringle, played by Sir Richard Attenborough, when he boots off the other Santa Claus because the guy is intoxicated, and the guy is very upset about that. I liked that framing device, whereas with in the original, you don't have that added tension. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You have more of the dynamic of Chris has come into our world in a manner of speaking. He's getting out in the public. He wants to see if he still is relevant as the person of Santa Claus because, well, he is Santa Claus. He is in a lot of ways the spirit of the Christmas season, of Christmas itself, at least from a, I don't want to say commercial because that would not be accurate, but I want to say secular more so because he doesn't tie into the more religious aspect of Christmas, but he does tie into the secular ideas of Christmas, though there are aspects of the character or the person of Santa Claus that can be tied into the Christian faith. So, because you have the idea of goodwill towards men, treating your fellow man, yourself, your fellow human being decently with respect and with care and so on. And that's very much in keeping with the Christian mindset. But both versions of Chris, they're wanting to see if they can take a pair, if he can take a pair of people who are essentially non-believers in anything fictional, anything fantastical, anything mythological, or anything of that idea, and change their minds. And then, of course, those two people are Doris and Susie Walker. Anything, the original version with Maureen O'Hara and Natalie Wood, and then this newer version with Elizabeth Perkins and Mara Wilson. So, and I do want to say hello to Chad Ferris. I did see you there, bud. Good to see you. And again, Merry Christmas, my friend. Says the first time I watched this movie was the remake. I was a freshman in high school, and when Christmas came, the remake was on TV. I watched with my parents, and we enjoyed it. Me and my parents enjoyed the movie when we watched on TV because Richard Attenborough and Mara Wilson. And Ferris, I cannot say I disagree with you. That was the first version I watched and everything when I was preparing for this stream, for this review. Um, the thing, the things that they did that changed or anything, I'm gonna kind of bop back and forth and everything, comparing the two films between the remake and the original. One of the things they did, like I mentioned, they added the added tension of Cole's department store in the remake, having had several years of financial decline, and now all of a sudden they get this really good Santa Claus. They have him in the Thanksgiving Day parade. It's the official launch of the Christmas season and the shopping season and all that stuff. One of the things I really liked in terms of the remake. Now, and I'm going to go and compare these two scenes, and because I wanted to hit on these scenes, I wanted to hit on them early because these are two. There are several scenes in this movie where Santa or Kris Kringle is interacting with the kids. There are several scenes in both versions that are rather memorable, but these two scenes in particular are, I think, more memorable, and I think they were intended to be that way. And you all might know the scenes I'm going to talk about. In the remake, it's when Chris is talking to the girl who is deaf. In the original, with between E- Edmund Gwynn's Kris Kringle and the little girl who is Dutch, who doesn't speak English. I liked both of these scenes. I liked the ideas they espouse. I liked the delivery and the performance between the two girls and also between the two Chris's and everything. Because in both versions, Chris is having to break through a language barrier, one with a girl who is handicapped, the other one with a girl who speaks a foreign language. And the thing that I found interesting is that Em and Gwyn actually spoke proper Dutch. Now, the things I found interesting with those two scenes. So, I'm Ferris. I'll get to your comment, but I want to stay on this point and everything. Don't think I'm ignoring you, bud. Obviously, I'm not. But these two scenes, granted, they were framed for the time in which the movies were made and put out for the public. Obviously, in the 1990s, we weren't dealing with any type of post war issues at that time. But obviously, there are children in the world who unfortunately cannot hear. They are deaf. And I think the way they handled that scene between Chris and the little deaf girl, he wasn't patronizing. He wasn't demeaning, and you wouldn't think that Santa Claus or Kris Kringle would be, but he's very complimentary to her, and he uses the thing I like is he takes her off his lap or off his knee and stands her in front of him so that he can use both his hands to talk to her in sign language. And the mom and actually Susie Walker, Mara Wilson's Susie Walker, is off to the side, kind of hiding, but she's spying on Chris. And he's like, "What's your name?" He asks her in sign language. And she responds back, but you can read her lips. And I know little bit of sign language. And when she does the gesture for thank you, I'm like, that's what that means. So she does lip it and everything, or she does mouth it rather, is what I meant to say. And then now in the two versions, in the remake, he has her he sings jingle bells, or he has her sign jingle bells in sign language, and he's singing along with her. In the original version, I don't know the name of the song. I have an idea because they sing it all in Dutch, and my guess is it might be a Dutch Christmas carol that's related to their version, or their understanding, or well, how they name him, Santa Claus, or as we call him, Santa Claus. And the little Dutch girl sings the Christmas carol, and Chris is singing along with her. Now, I did have Ma'am Ambassador, and I want to give credit where credit is due. I wasn't able to look up the actual song that the little Dutch girl and Chris sing. But Mama Ambassador was kind enough that she actually looked up the dialogue between Chris and the little Dutch girl and her mother. So, and I do want to read it here for you all. Now, I'm not going to try and read the Dutch. I'm going to read the English, but just so for those of you that have never seen the original, I would encourage you, if you have seen the remake and you enjoyed it, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you, go see the original or go watch the original, because it is the remake is good. I will admit the remake is very, very, very good. I cannot overstate that enough. But the original, there's some moments, there's some points in this movie that do make it somewhat superior in comparison to um, the remake. Now, as I was saying, the dialogue between Chris and the little Dutch girl, for those of you who might be wondering, Chris says to her, "Well, young lady, what's her name? What's your name?" And the Dutch girl's adopted mother says, "I'm sorry, she doesn't speak English. She is Dutch. She just came over. She's been living in an orphanage or orphan's home in Rotterdam ever since. Well, we've adopted her. I told her you wouldn't be able to speak to her, but when she saw you in the parade yesterday, she knew you were Santa Claus, as she calls you, and that you could talk to her. Well, I don't know what to do." And Chris says to her, "Hello, I'm glad you came by." The little Dutch girl, her face lights up. "Oh, I knew you were Santa Claus." Chris says, "But of course." And the little Dutch girl says, "I knew it. I knew you would understand." Chris says, "Naturally. Tell me, what would you like from Santa Claus?" Santa Claus. Little Dutch girl, "Nothing. I have all kinds of things. I only want to stay with this lovely lady." And then, of course, they sing the Dutch Christmas Carol. And the interaction, I could not help but just smile. When I watched both of these movies, I was smiling and laughing and just having an absolutely wonderful time with both these movies. These are feel good movies. They make you feel good inside. And that's one of the reasons I am really glad Mam Ambassador encouraged me to watch these. Now, to your other comment here, Ferris, the remake was the only time I ever saw Dermot Mulroney in a feature film besides his famous role in the Practice series. When I was 4, I remember my dad loved the Practice often. Yeah, I remember him in that as well, Ferris. So, let's see. How many times did J.T. Walsh get cast as a character we all had before this movie? I only know him in a few: Good Men and Pleasantville. Well, here's the thing, Ferris. And these may be movies that you have never seen, or maybe have never gotten around to seeing, or maybe you just forgot that he was in. If I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I do, J.T. Walsh was also in Good Morning Vietnam. He played Sergeant Major Dickerson, or as he was so eloquently called, Sergeant Major Dick, because, well, he was one. The other one, and now I might be wrong, this might be a different actor entirely, but the other actor, or the other part that he played, was actually in Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I think I'm right. I think JT Walsh, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost 100% sure that JT Walsh was in Good Morning Vietnam. I'm not 100% sure if he was in Trading Places, but I think he was. So, but yeah, JT Walsh as the prosecutor in the remake version of Miracle on 34th Street. Yeah, you hated his guts. Now, here's the interesting thing. Um, in the remake, if you remember, Ferris, and to anybody that's watching this on YouTube and everything, and you want to come in, I have popped the link up top and everything. It is pinned. So if you want to pop in and discuss the movie with me, or you just want to say hi, the link is there by all means, if you're able to. If you can't, I understand, believe me. So, but the thing I found interesting, they changed the remake just enough so that it was its own thing. It wasn't just a shot for shot remake of the original. And I think that was actually a wise move because there's so many similar beats in both movies, but at the same time, they made it different enough that it was fresh and it was interesting and it was still entertaining and it still got across the ideas of what this movie is trying to put forth. So, but in the remake, it's the prosecutor's wife that takes the stand and testifies for the defense. In the original, it's the prosecutor's son who takes the stand and is questioned by Mr. Gailey, the defense attorney for Chris. And I honestly, I really enjoyed that scene because there you have the prosecutor, and the he you could see the frustration on his face because now there is one thing that I liked better in the original than I did with the remake, and I'm glad they did. I did not like this change, but it did not like sour. It didn't sour me on the movie. Now, during, and I'm trying not to spoil everything, but as with both movies as old as they are, yes, I'm going to spoil certain things, but at the same time, I encourage you still go watch these movies. Go watch both versions because they are their own creature. They are their own movie. Yes, they have the same name. Yes, they have similar beats. Yes, they have similar characters and so on. But they both have a charm and they both have very strong entertainment value, especially this time of year. Well, and just a brief aside, I will not drag this on too long. I've been dealing with a lot over the last 5 months or so with my health and so on. And most of you know this time of year is not always easy for me, because of some personal things that happened in my life around this time of year back when I was young, my father passing away and so on. These movies, and I do not use this phrase very often because it's very rare that it's true here. But both these movies, granted, they have similarities. Both these movies warmed my heart. And I think that's something that we all could use this time of year, and especially as rough as things are right now for all of us across the country and even around the world. These are the type of movies that can put you in a better mood. And that's their intent. And I encourage you, I really do. You get an opportunity to watch these movies, do so. Whether it's the original or the remake, or both, watch these movies. They really lift your spirits. I know they did for me. Yeah. hmm Yeah, Ferris and everything. And I did find that interesting. And I did find it very appropriate because like I said, there are a lot of they use a lot of the same plot points from the original in the remake, but and yeah, and that's another thing I didn't know that this movie was actually produced by John Hughes. Anything, I guess I had missed that in my research when I did my director spotlight back a year or so ago on John Hughes, that he actually was a producer on this movie. This film was actually directed by a not a terribly well known, but a fairly decent director by the name of Les Mayfield. So uh, I would imagine they probably did because of how well received. Because here's the thing: 1947 to now, this movie, the original, has had legs. Granted, it's got a remake, but I don't think that is a discredit to the film. I think they wanted to remake it to kind of bring it up for a modern audience, and I don't see anything wrong with that in this particular case. Are there certain movies that should never be remade? Say, for instance, It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah, that's a movie I don't think should ever get a remake by any means. But with Miracle on 34th Street, I it did not bother me because again, I didn't have a very strong connection to this movie. So I had a more of an open mind to give it a shot, check out both versions, and see which one I liked. Now, the truth is, I like both of them. Are there aspects of both of the two that I like better than the other? Yes, there is, and I should go into that now. What did I like better about the original in comparison to the remake? I did like, and I've already mentioned this, but I'll just briefly repeat. I'll just restate it briefly here. I did like the fact that we saw Chris interacting with the people in the company, even if some of those people were not the most amiable of individuals by any stretch. Whereas in the remake, Chris does interact with people around him. I mean, obviously, Doris and Susan Walker, Mr. Bradford, Brian Bradford, played by Dylan Mulroney. Um, the people in the company, people out in public, and so on. Obviously, the guy. Now, the one thing that they did with the remake, and I think they did a slightly better job in the original than they did with the remake. They had an in company psychiatrist at Macy's and everything that's there to evaluate and console a lot of the employees and so on, should they want it or should they need it or should they be required to go see one. And they have one there. What I liked about the original is the main conflict is within the store itself because you have a psychiatrist who is very antagonistic towards Chris, who's even antagonistic and belligerent towards some of the employees. One employee in particular, he's a janitor, he's a maintenance guy there at the department store, and Chris takes bonds with him and everything, and encourages him to continue on playing Santa Claus at the local YMCA and so on. But the psychiatrist belittles him and tells him that he's got some sort of guilt complex. And Chris has had his fill of it because the psychiatrist has been very belligerent and vicious and mean spirited towards Chris. And Chris, okay, Santa Claus is not human, but at the same time, he is human just like us. He's prone to the same emotions and everything and so on that we would be, and that's one of the things I do like about both versions here, both with Emma Gwynn and Sir Richard Attenborough's performances. They give a human face to Santa Claus, to Kris Kringle. Now, there are the movies that have done that and done it very well, and I'll be actually discussing those movies on Friday night. Um, Little plug, I'm going to be doing a live stream this Friday night and everything. I haven't set the time yet, but it'll probably be around 8:30 or so. Discussing all the different incarnations of Santa Claus that have been on the big and small screen, and which one is our favorite, which one is the quote unquote best, and just discussing the idea of why the person of Santa Claus has endured on in media for as long as he has. And not so much from the commercial perspective, but more so from the secular or the public perspective. Because for I don't want to get into a big long thing here, but I'll tie this back into um, the main topic. What we have in the original is that the psychiatrist baits Chris into becoming hostile towards him. And he takes a umbrella and pops him on the head with it. And the guy feigns like Chris and everything is beating him up when he barely bumped him on the head. Now, in the remake, what they did was they brought the disgruntled Santa Claus who was drunk at the Thanksgiving Day parade back in as the point of conflict. The other thing they did was they have another large department store chain that's right across the street from the Kohl's department store where Chris is working, which is kind of the stand-in for Macy's from the original. And you've got the head of the company at the other department store who's trying to scheme and get rid of Chris or have him discredited in some way or another. And here's the interesting thing. The actor who plays the head of the other department store was actually the diplomat from Lethal Weapon 2. The ones to keep saying, diplomatic immunity, and when Murtaugh shoots him and says, it's just been revoked. That's the same actor. So, and I do want to say hello to the chat. Happy Dinosaur 8000. Happy, it's good to see you. And I know you say happy, that's your thing. I respect it, but Merry Christmas to you, buddy. Good to see you. So, let's see, Ferris. Whenever I watch the remake, I always remember Christmas Day in New York back in the '90s. There's always that feel good moments and feel good and good time moments way before smartphones, social media, etc. I get that, Ferris. Believe me, I do. I remember when Christmases were a lot simpler. But I will say this: if it hadn't been for the advancements of the internet and Wi-Fi and technology, I couldn't be here with you all talking about these movies that I love, and even movies that I have just recently been introduced to. So let's see, what else do you have to say first? Home Alone 2 reminds me of my childhood when I lived in New York during the winters, but the remake of Miracle on 34th Street reminds me of what a joy Christmas was in New York back in the 90s. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, Rockefeller Center, the Christmas tree, all the department stores decorated and decked out for Christmas, especially Macy's. You know, I'll share a little story from my childhood. Now, this is more so from my grandmother's childhood, which is, well, kind of a snapshot of the 1940s in a way. Granted, let's see, her and granddad had been married. I think they had been, let's see, he got back from World War II in 45. They had mom in 46. She would have been a year old. Happy. I'm kind of getting into that and everything, but let's see. My grandmother told me a story once from when she was a girl in like I think it was elementary school or something. And she had a teacher who would travel during the holidays, and she would go to New York City to the old Macy's department store and everything. And she told me that they had a whole floor. I mean, a whole floor was like in the upper part of the department store at Macy's. That was probably the biggest toy department in the world. And I thought to myself, I would have loved to have seen that toy department. Absolutely would have. Now, to your question, Happy, and I've got more points I want to cover in terms of the two movies, of the two versions. I have to say, Happy, this is difficult because both movies have good strengths. the remake has a weakness, and it's kind of a glaring one, but at the same time, it doesn't detract from my enjoyment of the movie itself. I honestly happy in this particular occasion. I have to say it's an even split because I like both versions equally, even though there is the one part in the remake that I have an issue with. Now, the issue I have with the remake is this, and that's the conflict itself. What causes Chris to be put into Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital there in New York? When the disgruntled Santa, the rent a Santa, confronts Chris on the street and he accuses Chris of, I'm trying to put this politely because this is a Christmas stream and I don't want to get too harsh, for overly liking kids. If you get my drift, I'm sure you all do. And Chris becomes rather enraged, and I cannot say unjustly so. But two of the employees from the competing department store are there and they entrap Chris, and they're like, this guy, that's the Cole's department store Santa Claus. He just attacked that guy. He's a crook. Lock him up." And they plaster his picture all over the wall. They do all over the newspapers and all over the news and everything, and they just defame him from one up one side, down the other. And okay, this is the other thing I did not care for in comparison to the remake. In the remake, this is why I did not care for this in the remake in comparison to the original. When they get to the court case itself, and the prosecutor is talking to the judge that's going to oversee the case, and the remake, it's Robert Prosky. For those of you who might remember, he was in another movie that I just recently reviewed, Last Action Hero with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had a small role in the Robin Williams movie Mrs. Doubtfire and everything. There, he played the TV station owner, Mr. Lundy, I think was his name. The prosecutor is trying to hurry up and shush this trial away and just have Chris committed. And he implies to the judge that um, he'll get a rather large campaign contribution if they'll go ahead and just commit Chris without any type of trial. It introduces the concept of having a crooked judge. I didn't care for that. Now, yeah, I'm sure that sort of thing might happen, but at the same time, I think it detracts from the movie. Yes, this sort of thing happened probably back in the 1940s just as much as it does in the 90s and even so today. But I think that was a mark against the movie, but it's not a glaring issue for me. In the original, you have the judge's campaign manager who isn't trying to bribe him. Obviously, he is his campaign manager, but he's telling the judge, "Look, you're up for re-election next year. You have Santa Claus committed, or you tell the people of New York that you don't believe this guy is Santa Claus, you might as well kiss your election chances goodbye." He's like, "You've got to walk a very tight rope, very fine line with this case." He's like, "Or otherwise, you might as well um, consider your chances sunk." I like that angle better in the original in comparison to the remake. Now, I will say I do like the two scenes and everything. The one from the original, the one with the remake, where in the original you've got all the post carriers bringing in all the mail that's been addressed to Santa Claus, and that's what they use to prove that Chris is Santa Claus. But I do like what they do in the original, where Susie Walker gives the judge a bill and she circles "In God We Trust." So, um, and that's where the judge goes, well, if the United States government believes that there is a God, and our founding fathers believe that there is a God, they believe it so much that we put it on our currency, and we don't have any empirical proof that God actually exists, then I cannot, in good conscience, say that Santa Claus is in fact this man, Chris Kringle. Now, obviously, the scene from the original with all the mail bags and the post carriers and all the letters piling up on the judge's desk is very iconic, and it is. And it's a funny scene. It really is. I would lie to you. I would be lying to you all if I didn't get a chuckle. I did. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Ferris. I like the relationship between Susan and Brian. Susan didn't have a father, but Brian was the closest to being a father figure to Center. But damn, I love that ending where Dory and Brian were married. Yeah. Now that's the one thing I did like a little bit better in the remake in comparison to the original, where you have Brian and Doris or Dory end up getting married. They show up at the uh, Catholic Church at the stroke of midnight on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and the father is there. He's like, "You two want to get married?" And they end up doing so. Now, in the original, they don't do that. Now, it is implied that eventually Doris and Mr. Gailey will eventually will get married because this is the 1940s. It's not really socially acceptable for a man and a woman to live together if they're not married. So it's understood that they will eventually get married. They will buy the house for Susie and they will live as a family, and Susie will finally have a father. That's one of the things I do want to bring up. Which is the better Susie? And even which is the better Doris or Dory? I like the backstory for both and everything. I like the fact they kept both the same and so on. I did like the idea that she essentially got the father ended up um, leaving and left Doris all alone by herself. I did like that idea and everything. I like that they carried it through in both versions. So, um, hang on one second. I want to check out something. Okay. The other, let's see. Before the happy ending, Susan wanted to have a father and a brother. Brian wanted to marry Dory. I guess it's all thanks to Chris making it happen. Yeah, here's the thing. Because, okay, getting back to my point, who do I think is the better Susan? Obviously, we have Natalie Wood, who would go on to be a very well known, very well respected, very popular, very successful actress in Hollywood, although she did have a very tragic death. We also have Mara Wilson, who was up until a point a very successful child actress. I mean, she did this movie. She was in Mrs. Doubtfire. Um, she did another movie called The Simple Wish. She did a whole mess of movies and everything. She was in Matilda and everything. That was another movie of hers that I'll say it. I've seen Matilda. I saw Matilda in theaters. I actually enjoyed it. Me and Mother and Baxter went and saw it when it came out. Um, I think both actresses brought something different to the character of Susan, though there are similarities between both performances. She seems very worldly, very old aged, even though she's a young kid. Um, she's been raised to be somewhat of a realist and a little bit of a cynic by her mom because of what has happened to her mom in her life. Um, but the thing I like between the two, the thing I like with Natalie Wood's performance is she's a little more open to believing that Chris is Santa Claus in comparison. Um, it takes a little bit more for the Susan or Susie in the remake to get to that point. Now, I will say the one thing that did is a benefit and everything is a strength in comparison to Natalie Wood's performance is Susie's or Mara Wilson's performance. She does aid in Chris's defense when she takes the card up there. You don't have that moment in the original. But that isn't necessarily entirely a bad thing by any means. Um, Now, I will say the relationship between Susan or Brian or Mr. Gailey in the remake and the original, you there are pluses and there are minuses here because we do see more scenes between Brian and Chris in the remake in comparison. Now, although there is an added scene in the remake in comparison to the original where we do actually see Doris and Susie and Brian sitting around the table for Thanksgiving dinner. We don't have that scene in the original. It's implied that they have dinner, but we never actually see it happen. At least, not that I recall, anyhow. Um, the other thing that I, the other thing that I liked about Susie from uh, the original, and I don't know why they didn't have the same. Maybe they just didn't want to have too many similar scenes from the original in comparison to the remake. But it's Susie or Susan herself who tells Chris that she doesn't have a dad, and it comes from her. It doesn't come from. Um, I think it's either. I think it's Brian in the remake that tells Chris about everything that happened between Doris and her husband, Susan's father. I think that gives a little more weight um, to Susan's performance or and her character and everything and how Natalie Wood played her in the original movie. But there is one scene, and I did find this is rather comical. Now they don't have it in the original or anything because I think they realized that there were just some scenes they could not copy and they should not copy. But there's a scene where Susan's blowing bubble gum in bed and Chris is talking to her. And he's like, "Hey, do you have a piece of bubble gum I could have?" She's like, "Yeah, sure, here." And you don't see it happen, but you see the expression on Susan's face. And Chris goes to blow a bubble, and you hear a pop, and you see the expression on your face, and you probably figure out what exactly happened. And there's a scene a few seconds later. It's not a terribly long one, but it's okay because you don't need a whole lot. It's a scene of Chris picking or cleaning the chewing the bubble gum out of his beard, and you can see the expression on his face as he's actually picking the gum out, and you feel bad for the poor guy. You really do. Um, Now, in terms of Doris or Dory in the two versions, there's a lot of similarities here. Now, obviously, we all know from her later films that Maureen O'Hara is a very fiery redhead. She has very bright red hair. Doris, if I remember correctly, she's just a brunette. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or anything by a stretch. I'm not saying that it's like uh, redhead erasure or anything. I think they just wanted to make that differentiation. Although their personalities are very much in keeping with both versions. But I think the relationship between Dory or Doris and either Mr. Gailey or Brian from the two versions, she's a little more antagonistic. She's a little more on the nose in rejecting him. I mean, because there's actually a scene where he does propose to her and she just shoots him down and it is just absolutely, it's brutal how just intense she is in her denial of or rejection of his proposal. Now you don't have that scene in the original. Now there is a couple of scenes where we get the idea that Mr. Gailey and Doris have been having conversations about potentially having a future, having a relationship, or even potentially getting married. And there's a scene somewhat similar to that in the original. That's the proposal scene in the remake. But I have to say, I think the proposal scene in the remake is actually better because the relationship between Brian and Doris is more fleshed out. The relationship is somewhat fleshed out in the original, but it isn't as pronounced. Now, I will say the thing that I do like, and this is towards the end, or well, it's not towards it, it's in like the third act of the movie, and it's actually Christmas morning. Um, and Susan is sitting there in front of the Christmas tree looking at all the presents, and Doris walks into the living room, and you see this flicker of light on the wall, and you see it starting to dance all over the place and everything, and on the Christmas tree and so on. And you finally realize what it is, and Susie turns around and she sees it on her mom's finger. It's her mother's wedding ring because her and Brian got married. They actually went through with the ceremony at the Catholic Church. Um, Obviously, that scene doesn't take place in the original. The scene that they have, I enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, I did. Um, there's a scene where they have a Christmas party at the old folks' home, or the home for the aged, as they call it, and everything. Where Chris was staying until he decided when Mr. Gailey offered for him to stay with him and commute with um, Doris and everything to and from Macy's. Um, I think what the remake did that was superior was fleshing out the relationship between Doris and Brad. Now, granted, he's still a lawyer. He has the same profession in both versions of the movie. His name's just different, and he works for a different law firm. So, yeah, and that's true, Ferris, and I will agree with you. Yeah, yeah, you're right. And everything. I couldn't remember exactly if the Doris in the remake had red hair, but yeah, I think you are right because obviously I think they wanted to keep that tie because, like I said, anybody who had seen Maureen O'Hara in her later films once she started doing color films, she had very vibrant, bright red hair. Not like cartoonish or anything like that. That type of bright red hair, but it was a very intense, natural red. And they kept that for the remake as well. And yeah, Elizabeth Perkins. very attractive woman. I'm not gonna lie, and she's a darn good actress. I don't know if she ever. I imagine she probably did other movies besides this one. Obviously, more than likely. I just don't know any of them off the top of my head. And with the last name Perkins, I'm wondering if she's any relation to the actor Anthony Perkins and everything. For those you might know the name, and everything, he actually played he played Norman Bates in the original Alfred Hitchcock classic, Psycho. So it's one of his most well known roles and everything from his career. Now there may not be any relation at all. It could be just that's her name. But in terms of in comparing Brian Bradford and Mr. Gailey from the two versions, I like them both. I think they both do. I think they both their performances are both very good. Um, I think the portrayals are pretty much on par with one another. I don't necessarily like one more so than the other. Um, Susie, or not Susie, but Doris. I mean, obviously Maureen O'Hara, grand old grand lady of old Hollywood. One of the few leading ladies that John Wayne worked with more than once. I think she was in two or three of his movies, two of which I can name right off the top of my head, and that's McClintock and Big Jake. Um, I can't remember if there's another one that she was in, but I'm sure she was. Uh, in terms of physical appeal, physical attractiveness, I think both of them are very, very lovely women, both very talented actresses. Their performances, I think, are on par with one another, though there are some different scenes between the two movies and everything that give a different aspect or a different perspective on the character of Doris in comparison to the other. Um, I don't think there's a definitive is one better than the other. I think they both are good. At least that's my take on it. But the big question comes down to, and I've been kind of leaving this not for the end, but everything the last everything of the two characters, and that's of course Chris. Who's the bear, Chris Kringle? Who's the bear, Santa Claus? And the reason I wanted to leave that for last is because there's a lot there to dig down into. I did not know that, Ferris. So thank you for bringing that up. Really, thank you. I was not aware of that at all. Nemo's mom who got killed in the opening. Man, mm, that's a movie. That's the beginning of a movie that just guts you even before the movie starts. But who was and I'll go a little bit more into this on Friday night, but for these two, I'll keep it focused on these two. Who is the in my opinion alone, who is the better Chris Kringle? Who is the better Santa Claus of the two? In terms of physical appearance, they both match up equally well. Now, I will say I do like the gold rimmed half moon glasses that Richard Attenborough's Chris Kringle wears in comparison to uh, Edmund Glenn's. He doesn't wear glasses, and that's okay because Richard Attenborough he does have to wear glasses in real life, or he did before his death and everything in the parts that he played and probably in real life as well, off screen. Attenborough's performance had a little more. energy to it, in a manner of speaking. Now, grant this is Sir Richard Attenborough. He's a very well known, was a very well known, very well respected, very well regarded actor, both stage and screen, both. So he can bring a little bit more complexity to the character of Kris Kringle, of Santa Claus. And his time with the other characters in this movie does differentiate him from Edmund Glenn's performance as Kris Kringle. I think the thing I like better about his performance in comparison to Edmund Glenn's, although don't misunderstand me, I really do like Edmund Glenn's performance as Kris Kringle. Um, and I know this may sound odd, but when Chris is confronted by the disgruntled Santa Claus, the fake Santa Claus, and you see that touch of genuine anger and almost to the point of rage on Chris's face, and you would never imagine Santa Claus to have that expression on his face ever. And it's believable, it's palpable, it's you just made Santa Claus mad. I don't think that's something you necessarily want to do. Not a good idea. Yeah, in fairness, I'll get to that here in a few minutes. Yeah, I imagine the SPCA kept a close eye on how they treated that reindeer, so I don't think there was any issue with that at all. So, but um, back to the two Chris's, the two Santa Clauses. Again, while there are some both slight and major differences between the two performances, I think what really brings it home for me in terms of will they fly on Christmas Eve? Yeah. Um, I think the big thing for me is this: which Santa would I want to interact with? And I have to say, with all sincerity, both. Do both performances encapsulate and bring into clear contrast the idea that we all have, either as adults or as kids, of who Santa Claus is? Edmund Glenn and Sir Richard Attenborough both embody that ideal and bring it through their performances perfectly. And I say that with all sincerity. They both are on par with one another. There are differences, yes. I acknowledge that. And I've stated as such. But I think for Sir Richard Attenborough, while he was bringing his own touches and his own performance to this part, he was not trying to overshadow Edmund Glenn's performance by any means. He wanted to give his own take, his own idea, his own performance on the character of Kris Kringle, on the person of Santa Claus. And I think without overshadowing the original, he succeeded because both performances stand side by side as equal, or as close to equal as you can get. Now, in terms of some favorite scenes, because I gotta go through some favorite scenes of mine, and there's quite a few. Also, obviously, I've listed a few of them. The wedding scene there in the church and everything in the remake. When Mr. Macy takes the stand in the trial in the original, I can never forget the line by Mara Wilson. Hey, you jerk! Mr. Kringle is the nicest man in the world. Yeah, one of my favorite scenes is actually um, when Mr. Macy is on the stand testifying, and the Macy's department store psychiatrist is sitting there. I think he's in the gallery or he's at the prosecutor's table or whatever. And Macy walks by and he's like, "Where'd you get your degree? A correspondence course?" And within a heartbeat, Macy looks at the guy and says, "You're fired." After all his blow, after all his bluster, after all of his haranguing and just grinchery. I think I just invented a new word, grinchery, because the psychiatrist was in terms. And I even think the Grinch, the original Grinch, would be like, "Geez, dude, yeah, I hate Christmas, but you're just an asshole." Jim Carrey's version, not Boris Karloff's. The psychiatrist in the original was just a massive jerk. And I could not help but bust out laughing when Mr. Macy looks him right in the eye and says, "You're fired." I loved it. After him berating and belittling the janitor who wanted to do nothing more than bring joy to other kids' lives by playing Santa Claus at the local Y. And he's trying to fill his head with all this psychological nonsense about, well, you must feel guilty about something, and there must be something wrong with you because you want to do this. There's nothing wrong with him. Something wrong with you. For one, you don't have a job no more. Another thing I like, as in anything, and this is in the aftermath, and this is from the remake, not from the original. And Ferris, you probably know the scene I'm talking about. Um, it's after the trial and after the prosecution, after the judge rules that Chris is Santa. And the owner of the other department store that was in competition with Kohl's goes, "I'm really going to catch hell for this, aren't I?" And the two assistants, the two goons and everything, they're like, "Yeah, you are." And the one woman, and if I remember correctly, the one woman who played the one goon was actually Daphne from Frasier, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. The other goon actually played Lord Raiden in the sequel to the absolutely dreadful sequel to Mortal Kombat Annihilation. And they both open up their overcoats and they've got "I believe" or a Kohl's pin that says "I believe in Santa" inside their coats because even they believed that Chris was Santa Claus. I could not help but chuckle and laugh and everything at that scene. Absolutely hysterical. Even it was hilarious. Another great scene after the parade, and the owner of the other department store is like, "We've got to come up with some gimmick to get people in the store." And he's like, come up with something free, something cheap, and everything to get people into. He's like, because I don't want to line outside of Coles' doors. And the day after the Christmas parade, there's a line around the block going both directions for people to get into Coles, and all the workers at the other department store right across the street, it's completely dead, and they're trying to hand out um, bubble gum bubble gum guns to the kids, and the parents are like, nope, we don't want these. Sorry, no, no thanks, we're good. I could not help but laugh my head off. And there's two scenes and everything where they do this. They try to give away some freebie to get people in, and there's no line, there's no nothing. Nobody wants to go in the other department store. They all want to go to Kohl's. Now, the other thing I did like, and this occurs in both versions, is when Chris is telling people where to go get the toys for their kids, and in both versions, this happens. And both department stores, whether it's Macy's or Kohl's, says we're going to take this and we're going to run with it, and we're going to not necessarily put our other competitors out of business, but we're going to beat them at their own game. And if we don't have it, we will tell the customer where they can get it and for how much. And the amazing thing is, it works, and it works in the favor of both department stores. And you have scenes in both versions where the other department stores that are competing with either Macy's or Kohl's are saying, why didn't we think of this? As someone who used to work in retail, it's a practice that's done today. Because as someone who worked in retail, and I miss it, I'm not going to lie, because I do, I would often tell customers, whether it was whatever business I was working, whether store I was working for at the time, I'd be like, hey, we don't have this. I could probably tell you who does and give you an idea how much it's going to cost you. And I never got a single ounce of flack from my supervisors, from my bosses, from my managers, nobody. I know what you're talking about. The one guy who were in the competition and was played by James Remar. Like, always plays a hothead type of character. I saw him first in the second Fast and Furious movie. I mean, Fast and Furious 2. Yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about. So, yeah, I know he was okay. This is another movie that I remember him from. It's a smaller role. He's not in it as much, but um, he plays a character by the name of Hugo Posh, and he is an adult film producer. And he's in the movie Girl Next Store with Elisha Cuthbert. If you remember that movie, Ferris, and for anybody who catches this on the replay. And he turns out to be, oh, I can't remember the name of the kid off the top of my head or anything, but the one that ends up dating Danielle, Alicia Cuthbert's character in Girl Next Door. Um, but another scene that I particularly like, and this is one that you brought up, Ferris, where they bring the reindeer and they're like, well, Chris, Mr. Claus, can this reindeer fly? And Chris is like, well, yeah, I can, but only on Christmas Eve. And that does remind me, there's a scene where Chris is in, I think, the Bronx Zoo or the Central Park Zoo or something, and he's visiting some of the reindeer. And it turns out that is some of his reindeer, actually. At least that's the impression that we get. I actually do enjoy that scene quite a bit. Um, One thing I will say, and I like this piece of continuity that they kept between the two movies, is the wardrobing. I Now, granted, one's in black and white, the other one's in color, so one is going to be somewhat more superior. But I will say I do like the idea that they had Doors dressed in dresses, long. Emil Hirsch, that was the name of the actor. For some live action. Yep, of Speed Racer. Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about, Ferris. Um, know exactly who you're talking about. Yep, that was the kid who played. I can't remember the name of the kid, but yeah, Emil Hirsch. But I like that piece of continuity where the women, or at least Doris's character, she was always almost always in dresses and long trench coats because obviously it was New York in wintertime around Christmas and December, so it's going to be cold majority of the time, and obviously it was. And the fact that Susie was always in pajamas and in a night coat or something of that affair, and they kept those two pieces of continuity in terms of the costuming for both versions of Susie and both versions of Doris. Um, Now, I will say this, and I imagine there's probably a colorized version of Miracle on 34th Street, the original. But I will say this, and this is something that they could do with the remake that they could not do with the original. I loved Chris's Santa Claus suit. the the gold thread, even though it probably wasn't actually gold thread, it was just gold colored thread. But the gold buttons that they actually have, it has a reindeer stamped into it, and it has the name of the reindeer on each button. Um, the boots had a very high shine to them, as did his belt. His belt had that really big gold buckle that you would imagine Santa Claus's suit and his belt would. His hat, the fur lining, all of it. I'll share a personal memory with you all, and it doesn't bother me to share this. To this very day, I still have a Polaroid of me, and I've actually got two or three of them. But I have a picture of me as a young kid with Santa Claus. But this particular Santa Claus was actually my dad. And at the time, as crazy as it sounds, I remember talking to my mother, and my dad was still alive at the time. And I told mom, I was like, Mommy, mom, I got my picture taken with Santa Claus. And I think my dad was like in the next room or something. I can't remember exactly because it's been a while since I've had this conversation. She's like, well, yeah, honey, Santa was at the church. Remember? It's like, yeah. She's like, didn't Santa Claus sound familiar to you at all? I was like, sound like Santa Claus. My mom kind of grinned and gave a little chuckle. And she leaned in and she's like, that was your dad. There have been many on screen Santas, and like I said, we'll discuss this Friday night. But I will always enjoy their performances. One of the most precious, wonderful memories from my childhood, and I'm happy to share it with you all, is that Polaroid of me, like 6 or 7 years old, sitting on jelly old St. Nick's lap, telling him what I wanted for Christmas, and never knowing behind the beard and the wig and the hat and the padded suit, that was my dear old dad. And that's what I love about these movies. The genuine, I think, authentic expressions on each and every one of those little kids' faces as they got to meet Santa Claus, whether it was Edmund Gwynn or Sir Richard Attenborough, with their authentic white beards and their beautiful red suits and that warm, welcoming, comforting smile. Yeah, Ferris. And in both versions, that did happen. Although I will say, yeah, I knew what you meant, Ferris. I knew what you meant. I like the ending to both. I think they're very upbeat, very positive endings because Susan did get her wish. She got a family, she got a home. Although in the remake, she mentions a baby brother. In the original, as far as I can recall, she never does. She just wants a home, and Chris, Santa Claus, came through. But I think what these movies allow us to do, regardless of our age, regardless of the generation we grew up in, was remember a time in our lives, maybe recent, maybe long ago, when we all believed, and maybe part of us still does, that there is a man up at the North Pole who checks a list, checks it twice, and if you're good, will do his best to make sure your gift is either in a stocking or under the tree. He may go by many names: Kris Kringle, Santa Claus, or as we know him here, Santa Claus. Because this is the time of year where we all can go back to that simpler time in our lives when we were a kid. And we can let that part of ourselves still dream. Ferris, I will discuss it briefly because honestly, for me anyway, the writing was on the wall months ago. Now, am I terribly surprised in the fact that Jonathan Majors was fired from Marvel Studios as Kang, or Victor Timely, or whatever he calls himself? No, because unfortunately the man does have a history, and he's got some issues that he has to work through, and he has some charges and some crimes that he has to answer to. I take no joy in the fact that Jonathan Majors has been fired, but at the same time, there is right and there is wrong, and what he has done is wrong. Is it a shame that we will not see him back as Kang the Conqueror? Yes, it is. It is a shame. but I am not going to dwell on it. As with most things in life, I take it in stride. I feel bad for all the plans that they had for his character that will now have to be scrapped. But at the same time, I will say this to the executives and to Kevin Feige. In the future, and even now, do a better job at vetting your actors. Do a better job at vetting your actors, your creatives, your directors, your writers, everybody, so that you don't have this situation happen again. Now, the situation with Chadwick Boseman, that was unavoidable. The man had terminal cancer. Unfortunately, he passed away. Not much can be done there. It was a shame that we lost him, but we did. But they should have been more thorough with, and this has nothing to do with Jonathan Major's race. I would say the same thing of a white actor or a Hispanic actor or whatever the case may be. But they should have done a more thorough job in vetting Jonathan Majors, doing a more thorough background check on him to make sure that something like this would not happen. Unfortunately, it did. And now Marvel's got another ding against it. Let's be candid. Just a few short years ago, Marvel Studios was riding high. Now, not so much. And I've already shared my thoughts on this. You can go check out that stream and everything. It's still up. I don't take it down. I haven't taken it down, nor do I intend to. I do a stream, it stays up, except for a few rare occasions. But it is what it is. Jonathan Majors is out. And I'm going to say this, and yeah, it might sound harsh, but I don't have time to sugarcoat anything for people. You screwed up, son. You've got no one else to blame but yourself. Now, if it turns out that this is all trumped up, no pun intended whatsoever, then that's unfortunate. But if it turns out that this all was legitimate, and apparently from the looks of it, it was, well, then you do the crime, you're going to have to do the time. So, but that's up to a judge and a jury to decide, or just a judge to decide. I have no say in it. Marvel's smart. Hopefully, there's still some good brains there. They'll figure a way out of this. They don't? Well, they don't. So, anyway, that's my thoughts on the whole Jonathan Major situation. So, but with that, I think we're going to go and wrap up for this evening. I do want to thank all of you who tuned in this evening, both Mr. Ferris and Happy Dinosaur 8000, for the rest of you who are lurking. Hope you all enjoyed the stream. As always, make sure you like this, like the stream, share it out with your friends, leave any comments on anything I brought up this evening in regards to Miracle on 34th Street or even on the situation with Jonathan Majors, if you feel so inclined. As I mentioned, Friday night, we'll have episode 3 of Christmas Rewind, where we'll be discussing who was your favorite or the best on screen Santa. So, but anyways, folks, you all have a good night. And as always, as I like to say, be yourself, be honest, Have integrity. Never take yourself too seriously. If you do all those things, you always have a place in the ambassadorial wing. Indeed, words to live by. In God we trust. But until next time, this is the Ambassador, signing off.
Let's be friends.